Module 2, SQL Server Security. In this module, we are going to briefly view the most important security aspects of SQL Server. And they are authentication modes, server and database level roles, and the service account. This is the shortest module of the whole training, because this is just an overview, but do not underestimate the security importance. The following images will illustrate a little bit about the security aspects I just spoke in the previous slide. So we have here our SQL instance, some databases, and the tables. And this login has two ways of accessing SQL Server, either using Windows authentication, which is where the user is not prompted for any password because the login is the same used in the Windows server locally or through the Active Directory. And then we have the SQL authentication, where the user needs to input his or her password, because in this way the login is created inside SQL Server and does not interact with the operating system. The SQL authentication is normally used by third-party applications that require connection to the database server. And there are the server roles applicable for the whole instance, such as sysadmin or security admin, and some other roles applicable only at a database, in this case user or system database level. That could be DB owner, data reader, or writer as some examples. And finally, the permissions can be on schema level. The schemas are object containers and are commonly used to avoid conflicts with objects with similar names. And a single login can have multiple users related to it. From a DBA perspective, the Windows authentication mode is easier to manage since the passwords are out of the control of the DBA and the users may change themselves through the Windows. While with SQL logins, the DBA can change many settings, including the password, like password policy enforcement, password expiration. So the decision of leaving one SQL Server instance with Windows only or mixed mode rely on factors such as the application requirements from the client or technical specifications from security policies. And whenever you change the server authentication method, you need to restart the SQL Server to take effect. The sysadmin is the most powerful privilege a user can have in SQL Server. As the database administrator, you should be very careful when granting sysadmin access to user or a group of users. This is because the shared administration can bring harmful consequences to the SQL instance, such as the ones I'm going to show here next. So these are some of the risks. Shared administration, accidental or intentional deletion of critical objects, changes to backup jobs are just some of them. The best practice in this case, when a user requests sysadmin, is to evaluate the situation and determine a lower privilege that fills the requirements. I have seen before cases where the client asked for sysadmin to perform simple tasks such as user database management, creating or dropping tables. The DB owner permission was in this case more than enough, so you need to consider that the client sometimes may not be very technical, and he or she asked the DBA for this privilege because someone else advised them to do so because it was more convenient. So it's the DBA duty to determine what is the real privilege required based on the technical specification on what exactly the user wants to do in the database server. The service account is a Windows login used to run the SQL services, just like I showed previously on the first demo on the SQL Server Configuration Manager. They can be changed at any time but requires a SQL Server restart to take effect. If this account does not have the necessary privileges, SQL Server may fail to start with access denied error, or it can even start, but at any time that an interaction is needed with the operating system, such as to perform a backup, it can throw errors. For a clustered environment, the same rule applies. The account, if it's part of a specific Active Directory domain, must have the required privileges. This image shows that NT/MS SQL Server is being used as a service account. This type of login is created during the product installation, and it's not a good practice to leave them like this. Instead, you should be using either a local Windows login or a login that is part of a domain. Let's take a look now at some security activities inside SQL Server. So the first command I wanted to show you here, it's the validate authentication mode, this query here. This command is a store procedure that tells me which is the current authentication mode running on my SQL Server. In this case, it's mixed. So we accept here Windows and SQL Server logins. It's the same thing. I can check if I right click here on the instance, then properties. I'm going to expand the security tab. As you can see here, server authentication, it's marked with SQL and Windows authentication mode. Another option I wanted to show you here, it's the login auditing one. Here we have faded logins only. This means whenever someone tries to access my SQL Server and the login fails, maybe because there was a bad password or the user did not exist, it's going to remain a record in the error log. So this is useful evidence if you are tracking unauthorized access to the SQL Server. The best practice is to use this option, both failed and successful logins. And instead of clicking OK, I'm going to click Script and Script Action to New Query window. Then I'm going to close this. I wanted to show you this because whatever options you change through the interface here on in Management Studio, if you click on Script, you can pick up the code that is executed behind the scenes. Then you can run by yourself and see what actually you are doing in the interface. So if you like more to write codes or T-SQL, this is the best option for you. And maybe if you are not so familiar with T-SQL and want to use the interface, it's the same thing. You can just do whatever you want in the interface, or can script everything to command. I'm going to execute this. There we go. Let me close this tab now. Move on to the second one. Here I'm going to create the Heisenberg login using the master database, create login Heisenberg, a password, and let's take a look at these options now. The default database is going to be tempdb, so whenever this user logs in, he's going to see the tempdb database. I'm checking on the check expiration option and the check policy. These are Windows options, Windows policies, so I'm saying this password will expire from whatever amount of days set on the local policy. Let's say it's 90 days or 60, and it's obeying the security policy, the password policy, which asks for specific characters, numeric or special characters. If I turn this off, my user is going to be created anyway, but it might be a security deviation whenever I run a health check. So let me create this, and now I have just created a user without any privilege. Let's take a look now what this guy here, Heisenberg, can do. I'm going to access again the SQL Server, selecting SQL Server Authentication. The login's already saved here, so I'm going to hit connect, and as you can see, a new session has opened. This one here that I was using, it's logging on with my user Nick, and this now it's Heisenberg. I'm going to right click here, reports, standard reports, and I'm going to select a standard report here like server dashboard to see if this user can actually see anything at all without any permissions. Let's take a look at what happens. You see there's a lot of red messages here saying the user does not have permission to perform this action over and over. So if I try again, let me pick another report like top connections, it's still going to fail because my user does not have privilege. I created an empty user without any server permission role or user database permission role. I'm going to close these screens. Let me go back to this session for Heisenberg. I'm going to try to expand a user database here. It's going to give me an error. Database is not accessible. I can even expand here some system database, but they don't work. I can even expand master stuff here, but this is just related to my local user. I'm not going to be able to change anything, create a table, create user, nothing. So what needs to be done is I'm going to go back to my other session here. Now I'm going back to Nick user, and I'm going to add a privilege. to Heisenberg. So author server role, sysadmin, add member, Heisenberg. Hit execute, and now this user, he has access to the whole SQL Server. Let me try again here. Standard reports, server dashboard. Now it's going to work. As you can see, it provided me some performance reports as I selected. And if I try to create a new table here, database, whatever I want, I will be able to do so. So let me go back to the exercise, option number 3. Again, on the Nick user, I'm going to drop Heisenberg from the sysadmin permission. There you go. And I'm going to change the permission from sysadmin to setup admin. Hit execute. And before I go back to that user, let me check here something. I'm going to expand security, logins. There is my Heisenberg. Let me refresh. There we go. Right click, properties. If we go to server role, you can see it has setup admin checking in. User mapping, it does not have any because I didn't select so. Let me hit cancel. And another things I wanted to show you here is these users right here, the NT servers / something. These are all created during the SQL Server installation. So these are automatic users. These are my Windows login, and the SA is specified also during the SQL Server installation if I select mixed mode as the authentication method. So let me collapse security database. I'm going to go back to Heisenberg session, right click, new query. Note that I am now on SPID number 56 on Heisenberg login. I'm going to try to read the error log, and hit execute. Let's see what happens. It says only members of the security admin role can execute the store procedure. So what I did before was change the permission from sysadmin, that was the top one, from setup admin. But it still cannot simply read the error log because it requires security admin. So each permission level that we seen on the previous slides, they have a specific function. And only the sysadmin is the most powerful one that can do whatever you want. Okay? So let me check here now the exercise number 4. This command, it's a simple select statement where I'm going to expect users with sysadmin privilege. I'm going to hit execute. So everyone, almost everyone on my SQL Server has sysadmin, including these accounts that were created during the installation, my Windows user, the SA, and their default database is the master one. Some security policies may consider this as a security exposure, and they may require you to change this from like TimpDB or MSDB, because master is the most critical database in SQL Server, and we're going to study more about this on module 4, database structures. The last item I wanted to show you in this demo is the security health check. This is a whole script that's going to perform a validation in the SQL Server instance for some security aspects according to a security policy from a client. So let me just execute and I'll show you what it does. It basically printed a report here with my instance name, the build version, the date of the scan, and it's going to validate some aspects according to whatever the client wants to add to their policy. So depending on which client you are working on, the policy may be stricter than others. Okay, depending on the industry you're working on. If you work on the financial industry or maybe a small company, their security policies may be different. So here it's validating the SQL audit logins. So it's logging all events. It says it's compliance. That is the option I showed you earlier about failed logins and both failed and successful logins. Here's the log retention. I'm going to show you about the error log for SQL Server on the next module, the health check one. So it's not okay. It's asking me to change the SQL retention to 99. Validating built-in administrator, says it's compliance because it doesn't exist. Built-in administrator, it's an account that it's created. Sometimes it's created during the SQL Server installation, and it should be removed because whoever has administrator access privilege on Windows may access SQL Server as well. Guest user existence, it's considered a best practice to remove all guest users. Ownership training, validating enforced password, says here all logins has enforced password on, and the SA login says not okay. You need to either disable or rename this SA login. So this is a very specific security policy because for whatever reason the client wanted to have no logins named SA on this SQL Server. So this is very specific, but it's just a sample I wanted to show you for this demo.